Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to our weekly Science Talk webinar series. As you see, today we are joined by the Director of UWIN, Dr. Mazdak Arabi, as well as Kristi Wamstad to learn more about the One Water City Self-Assessment Framework and Rating System. As you know, we are recording these and I will get them posted to our YouTube channel as well as the UWIN website. So please feel free to use the chat queue or alternatively turn on your mic and webcam at the end of the presentation so we can have an engaging discussion with our presenters. So with that, I'm excited to introduce both of our presenters for today. Dr. Mazdak Arabi is the Borland Endowed Professor of Water Resources in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Colorado State University. His research, education, and engagement activities focus on the development of scientific approaches and analysis tools that enable integrated water resource management in a changing world. His primary expertise includes hydrologic assessment, watershed modeling, water quality control, and system identification and optimization. In addition to serving as the principal investigator and director of the Urban Water Innovation Network, Mazdak is also the founder and current director of the One Water Solutions Institute at CSU with a mission of solving real-world water challenges via cutting-edge research and innovation. We're also joined by Kristi Wamstad, the Envision Verification Director at the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. In this role, Kristi maintains the verification process, ensures consistency in project reviews, and provides technical assistance. Prior to joining ISI, Kristi was the technical director for the U.S. Green Building Council's Lead for Cities and Communities and STAR Communities, a comprehensive sustainability rating system for jurisdictions. Kristi has extensive experience developing the technical aspects of sustainable cities and rating systems. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We really appreciate the opportunity to present this One Water Cities Self-Assessment Framework and Rating System. In addition to the funding that we have received from the National Science Foundation via the Sustainability Research Network Program for our entity referred to as UWIN, Urban Water Innovation Network, this project is also primarily funded by the Water Research Foundation via a project referred to as the One Water Cities Rating System. We are very grateful for all of the support we have received so far, both from NSF and from WRF. And also we have contributed substantial resources to this project from our own entity at CSU, the One Water Solutions Institute. So in addition to me and Kristi, who will discuss the backbone and the underlying concepts in our One Water Cities framework, we have benefited from many fantastic collaborators in this project. These include folks from the private sector with Corolla Engineers. Inga and Jacqueline from Corolla Engineers have been very helpful by bringing actual pragmatic and practical knowledge of working with utilities, water and wastewater utilities, in designing some of the information that you will see here. Jessica Bolson and Michael Sukup from Florida International University also have been very key to the success of our project and also the progress of the efforts that we've had. In addition to me and Sarah at CSU, we also have Dunya Desfuli, who is a PhD student at Colorado State University, and Galen McPherson, who has been also very active in doing literature review and also helping with stakeholder engagement activities and interviews. So we are, I know Kristi would attest to this, we are very grateful for all of our partners and collaborators bringing different perspectives, not only academic perspectives, but also actual pragmatic and real-world experiences. So this concept of One Water has been gaining attention and has been increasingly embedded and considered in cities across the United States and with similar type of programs globally. Many challenges in cities motivate this transition towards One Water approaches, and these essentially focus on developing a system or a set of water systems that are more resilient to change, particularly climate change, but also changes in population and demographics. Because via these changes, because of the changes in population and demographics, we are seeing increasing pressures on our aging infrastructure. So the reliability of services that we have traditionally relied upon for our water supply systems and pollution control and treatment facilities, as well as stormwater systems, have been undermined because of, again, increasing demands and also changes in our climate and other conditions that govern the response of the systems. Of course, these challenges vary across cities in the United States and, again, globally. In a paper by Dr. Bolson, Jessica Bolson, and the rest of us in water resources research, we discuss some of these primary challenges that confront communities across the country. And on the y-axis, you're seeing percent of the time that stakeholders in these regions found these issues to be critical issues for their region. So you can see climate change and extremes tended to be in all of these cities and regions an important factor. Water quality and pollution in general was another factor. Infrastructure integrity and reliability of services from infrastructure is another important issue. And then you will see other factors such as funding, stormwater in general, and stormwater resilience is an important issue. And one other factor that is very interesting to pay attention to is public awareness, literacy, and buy-in for new type of services and systems that we talk about are also very important factors. In addition to challenges, obviously, opportunities motivate these transitions toward One Water, and these opportunities are centered around this concept of making our communities more livable. And in general, community health becoming a factor in designing water systems. So opportunities to coordinate and collaborate across utilities and organizations within a city, including public sector and citizens in general, to lower costs. We are recognizing that by coordination and collaboration, we can perhaps lower costs for specific sectors, and this transition from managing systems in silos and then transition to an integrated approach can save dollars and improve cost considerations, but also affordability of services, both for potable water, wastewater treatment facilities, and also stormwater for cities where we do have stormwater fees. And as I mentioned, resilience to climate change is a significant factor that communities consider. And another factor that we hear a lot these days is the concept of equity and infrastructure in general, that as we design a new generation of infrastructure systems, considering equity and social environmental justice considerations are increasingly important. We've been very lucky that the National Science Foundation has given us additional funds specifically to incorporate social environmental justice issues in our research and hopefully subsequently in this One Water Cities rating system. So we always are confronted with this question, what is One Water? So let me just present the definition that we have presented to the Water Research Foundation as a part of our One Water rating system. And that is, One Water is a collaborative planning and implementation approach that fosters integrated and equitable management of water resources for long-term resilience and reliability, meeting both community and ecosystem needs. Of course, there are a lot of terms here, a lot of consideration, but as you can see here, the most important terms that perhaps underpin everything are integrated approaches, holistic thinking, system thinking. And if you look at the schematic of an urban water cycle, obviously, in cities, we think about potable water from sources of water to communities and economic sectors, wastewater flows, stormwater, and some other flows such as, again, river and coastal waters. But increasingly, we're thinking about transitioning from managing these systems, these water flows in silos by utilities that focus on individual ones, and enabling uses of recycled water for potable and non-potable uses. So essentially what we're talking about as we discuss One Water systems, we're talking about the strategies that promote improved conservation and end-use efficiency, fit-for-purpose use of alternative water sources, for example, harvesting stormwater or roof runoff, treating these resources to appropriate levels for applications for indoor and outdoor potable and non-potable uses. Green infrastructure, this concept of nature-based solutions, blue and green spaces in cities, obviously are very important factors to consider. Cities like Philadelphia, for example, have been leaders in promoting, implementing, and developing strategies for implementation of these systems. And another factor that I always discuss as a part of One Water approaches is integration goes beyond just water and wastewater systems. By integration, we also are referring to integrated planning, city planning in general, land use planning, and water management as well. So in our analysis, we have essentially categorized major factors that should be considered for a One Water rating system into some key elements. These key elements are presented here. These are informed by extensive literature review that we have done, and also key informant interviews from our partners in cities across the United States, including Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, Denver, and so on. These 9 elements that you see here include institutional collaboration, governance, and organizational culture, thinking about mindset of organizations and cities that manage water to promote these concepts. Stakeholder and community support is an extremely important factor. Obviously, again, public awareness, public knowledge about One Water approaches and integrated water systems. Water supply reliability and resilience, flood and stormwater resilience, water recycling and resource recovery. These are essentially references to regenerative systems that enable us to recover resources from the waste that we produce in our water systems. Watershed and ecosystem health, climate change resilience, livability, quality of life, and affordability of water and wastewater systems, and finally, social, environmental, and economic equity and justice considerations. So these are the factors that we have identified to be key elements of a One Water approach, and we are using this in this project to develop a rating system that would enable cities to assess their progress toward a One Water system and One Water approach. So with that, I will pass the presentation to Kristi, who has been our lead person to develop these the underlying framework that we want to use in our project or for this project.
Thank you, Mazdak. Hi again, my name is Kristi Wamstad. I am the verification director for the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. The Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure administers a rating system that has been used for over 120 projects in the US, infrastructure projects in the US and in Canada. And is one of the key tools that a lot of infrastructure projects are looking at in terms of defining more sustainable and resilient projects. I think that I was invited to participate in this initiative with the idea of the practitioner aspect of a rating system. So not just the theoretical design and, kind of how do we cover all of the components, the important components of One Water, but how do you make it practical? How do you make it usable? And, my experience, I've been designing rating systems for over 20 years. Back in, early 2000s, I was a part of the Oregon Bridge Delivery Partners, which was a program, a statewide program that repaired and replaced over 300 bridges throughout the state. And the state of Oregon called on the funding for that to be focused on sustainable projects. So we created rating systems around that. So I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background on, kind of what that a rating system is more than just putting topics together and putting them together in like a clean, nice looking way. You have to really think about how cities will use it and how to make it functional. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give a little background on what rating systems are. We see them day to day all over in our lives, from kind of the classifications for video games to movies, to even how we might rate our experience at a restaurant, per se. Next. But there are varying degrees of complexity on the surface of what you see in a rating system. That simple score or like a number makes it appear very simple, but the devil's in the details, and the degree to which the rating system truly gets at some real practical or actual issues is in the details of it. Next. The other aspect of sometimes that gets confused in terms of a rating is a ranking system. A rating system might be used to inform a ranking system, but they're not the same thing. Ranking is really about creating a hierarchy. It's about establishing, kind of like a best and worst list. We often see this with the most livable cities initiatives. We also see like countries being ranked or corporations being ranked. Usually those rankings are based on publicly accessible data that's derived by an organization that is outside of those cities themselves and is presented to them as like, here's where you rank in comparison based on the data that I found. Next slide. So there is a lot of data out there regarding water. We talked a lot during this project and its development about indicators and accessible data. If we could find all of this data, why don't we just create a ranking system and tell cities how well they're doing based on what we believe is the One Water components. However, what we know from the ranking system, and I can say this because I used to work for the city of Omaha as the sustainability director, is that when you're ranked, then it often is a misrepresentation of what the practical issues are for that city or for any of the administrators on the ground. Usually, if you're being ranked on external information, it's a very limited data set. It does not go into many of the nuances that might be important for your particular city. It requires a real significant investment to continue to publish and market the results. So you have like almost a separate entity that exists then, its sole purpose is to be generating ratings or rankings for other places. And it often leaves cities scrambling to either say, yay, we're at the top of this list, and we got to kind of practice all of that. Or like it happened to me often in Omaha, I get called into the mayor's office asking me to explain, why we're number 13 on this list of 15. And there usually wasn't clear guidance, clear methodologies for where that data was being gathered, or it was very blunt. The data was blunt. And so the reasoning was usually, well, they didn't cover everything that we were doing, or the data was old. And then it also creates this competition. We see this often with the Portlands and Seattles of the world, where if they're on this competitive list, maybe they don't want to share their practices. Maybe they don't want to say too much because they don't want someone else to rise above them on a particular list. So it's important that we kind of start to break down some of the competitive nature related to being on kind of recognized for your sustainability initiatives, and focus a lot more on the collaborative, like how do we help each other become stronger and stronger in this practice. And then finally, if it's going to be meaningful, it really needs to have a value, which means that the cities themselves need to participate, need to engage with the framework and the system in order to make it functional. Next slide. So there are many different sustainability rating systems that have been created over the years. There are even a number of indicators and structures and frameworks that have been created for the water and wastewater industry. And so these are like some of the pieces that really help inform like how we might structure our own rating system. Next slide, please. The most familiar in the sustainability world in terms of rating systems is LEED. This is LEED for operations and maintenance for existing buildings, but LEED for new construction goes back to the early 90s when it was implemented. It's changed over time, but its framework and structure is pretty common, and it serves as a model for many other programs out there. Essentially, there are categories and credits, and within those credits, there are prescriptive and also performance expectations. And the project teams that submit for LEED get points, and then they accumulate all of the points into one of the award ratings in the end. It's a third-party verified system, meaning that they submit their applications for review, and then they get awarded based on that. Next. However, the LEED is really focused on buildings. So in 2012, Star Communities created a system that was intended to look at the sustainability of a community at large. And so this was something that I helped administer actually for many years. And the key part of here that I wanted to point out here was the intentional division between meaningful actions and measurable outcomes. That for a city, it's more than just saying, here's a number, here's your percentage of impervious surface and what that means. It also was important to include what kind of activities that cities were doing to try and move the needle for those outcomes. Next slide. And then Envision. So Envision is what I administer now. And Envision is unique in that it is taking a look at infrastructure. It was designed by engineers. And one of the more fascinating aspects, I think, of the design for Envision is this idea of a scalable recognition for levels of achievement. So within each of the credits for Envision, you can go from improved to enhanced to superior, conserving, and restorative. So it really represents kind of a shade of green within multiple credits that recognizes performance and kind of tries to push performance to higher levels. Next slide. So what does all of that mean to this One Water Cities framework in the rating system? Well, initially with this entire project, we set out with certain design requirements. Some of those included providing the coherent, organized, and robust assessment tool that included data, that included metrics and benchmarks. We wanted something that could be used to monitor and evaluate progress for various One Water approaches. That there was the information to define, characterize, and quantify what the driving forces and pressures were, the combination of natural and human systems, and what kind of impacts were moving forward towards outcomes for One Water. We also wanted to help communities transition from a siloed approach, the idea that there's a wastewater group and a water group and a green infrastructure group, into something that's much more integrated and collaborative. And identify strategies and technologies, policy, institutional, financial pathways that help direct communities towards more One Water approaches. Next. During this process, we had interviews with many different agencies and surveys. And some of the things that we heard from that experience was that users wanted this tool to be easy to use. They wanted it to be meaningful at the stage that they were at. So if you were talking to a community that was really kind of advanced and had already made a lot of commitments to One Water, they wanted it to not just be a checklist of things that they've done, but something that would be motivational and inspirational for continuing to move forward. The communities that were just, starting, just thinking about it, they were looking more for a roadmap on, kind of what do I do to begin? What is the low-hanging fruit? How do I kind of get my community involved with this? So it was important to be at the stage where we began. Oh, one back. There'd be a self-assessment. Okay, I'll go faster. Be a self-assessment and then provide an understanding of how they're doing relative to others. So it's really important also that there was a consistent with a lot of the One Water approaches. that have been expressed in the past. Next slide. Okay, so as for that last point, one of the resources that we drew from in designing this rating system was the blueprint for a One Water approach. Next slide. So we can see with the One Water Cities self-assessment framework that we've created, we are talking about establishing levels of a kind of recognition or levels of classification of self-assessment to determine like what kind of phase you might be in. Level 1 being onboarding, where you're just kind of getting started, you're establishing the foundations and directions. Level 2, you're progressing, you're moving to more of like a planning phase and having more structure around what you mean. And then advancing, which is more of the implementation and adaptive aspect of the framework. Each of these have deliverables that are kind of within them that emphasize, kind of the end of their process and how they might move forward to the next. Next slide. Mazdak had mentioned before, you saw this graphic before, as far as the key elements of the One Water. Each of these things, again, have been approached by most cities in a very siloed approach in the past. Our attempt or our effort here in creating this framework was to break down those silos and to create a framework that everyone can navigate within. So next slide. So rather than designing the categories based on water, wastewater, resiliency, et cetera, and kind of along those lines, the idea was to create categories based on qualifications or qualifying aspects of what a One Water city would include. So for instance, having a planning aspect, having the organizational culture as a consideration, stakeholder engagement, informed actions, and then One Water monitoring. And then within each level, we will be defining the characteristics that would qualify in terms of each of these categories and how those cities might move themselves forward into the next level. Next slide. So here's one example of kind of how these levels are broken down. For One Water monitoring, there is at like level 1 a set of baseline indicators. These would be indicators that are easy to collect and are very meaningful for cities. And so the idea was that everybody would have these level 1 indicators available to them. At level 2, there's more benchmarking indicators. These are representative with targets and are maybe more particularly focused on the community based on the geographic location or the way in which they interact with water. That those could be a little bit more selective to the needs. And then level 3 would be performance indicators, which is really getting towards developing and quantifying these indicators so that you can monitor those over time and monitor improvements in the One Water approach. Next, I think I go back to Mazdak now, right, with this?
Yes, thank you very much, Kristi. I think I just want to also emphasize a couple of key things that I've learned from Kristi's experiences and how he has led the process. One is that we very early during the project decided that this will be a rating system or a rating framework for self-assessment at the city level. So we didn't want this system to be used for comparing city with city without necessarily understanding what type of data are provided and things of that sort. Kristi has emphasized during the process that a significant factor in this process is having key deliverables and endpoints and also transparency, meaning once a deliverable is produced, third-party entities then can corroborate, verify the conclusions or reported state, and therefore, by doing that, that establishes a consistent basis, perhaps for another system that may be used for ranking or other purposes. So we want to emphasize that this will be a rating system solely for the purpose of use within city organizations and utilities, and is focused on enabling cities to figure out how they are making progress. And as Kristi mentioned, there are 3 levels that we have designed. Level 1 is onboarding, cities that are just thinking about it, want to set the foundation. Then level 2, progressing, and then advancing, where actually we are monitoring how the state of the system is improving or changing by action. So in step 1 and 2, we are not talking about monitoring the change in environmental, economic, or even the social aspects of water management. We're talking about efforts that cities are undertaking to establish the One Water program and build organizational capacity to get there. So just a quick review of what Kristi said and how we are using those in developing this rating system. For those assessment or key One Water elements that we discussed, we have broken each element to subcategories, because you can think about these elements from various perspectives. Different cities deal with different pressures and driving forces in making change. If you think about drivers of adoption of green infrastructure in Denver or Los Angeles, those drivers may be different from why New York or Philadelphia would be implementing green infrastructure. Or city of New York may be thinking about conservation and end-use efficiency in the residential or drinking water conservation or use, or potable water use, for reducing pressures on their CSO, combined sewer overflows, while in Los Angeles or Denver or water-scarce regions, we may be thinking about these conservation efforts to improve or manage our water supply vulnerability. So I just want to highlight that these are the categories that we are looking at. For each of these categories in this table that I'm presenting here, we will have level 1 indicators, level 2 indicators, and level 3 indicators. So let me highlight one example of level 1, 2, and 3 indicators for water demand management. City of Denver just went through the process to develop a One Water plan. If you Google One Water Denver, you will see that there's a very nice website that shows the partners in the One Water Denver plan, including City County of Denver, Mile High Flood Control Districts, and then Denver Water and Wastewater Reclamation groups as well. Greenway Foundation is also a partner in that effort. So you can see their partners, the efforts, how they started the process or the onboarding process, and they just released this Denver One Water plan in August. So in our classification, we would deem Denver as a progressing city in terms of One Water rating system. They just created the plan and published that on their website with specific goals and strategies and indicators that are highlighted. So from this plan, you would see that they have 5 goals. Goal 1 is to promote institutional collaborations. And by the way, you will see that their goals are very consistent with those key elements of the One Water city. So a city may adopt all of those factors or a subset that are most needed for the transitions in the city. Goal 2 is to implement multi-benefit projects and programs. Goal 3, foster community support. Goal 4 is increased resilience and climate change adaptation and preparedness. And goal 5 is implementation of integrated water management solutions. So for each of these goals, our team participated in their efforts to develop indicators. And you can see in this case that we have a list of 8 indicators as listed here, that each indicator essentially is linked with one or more of these goals. In most cases, one indicator may be related to more than one goal, as you can see here. So these indicators are agency collaboration, integrated planning, broad community engagement and support, healthy urban waterways, urban livability and water equity, nature-based solutions, and fit-for-purpose water sources. And then water use efficiency is one of these indicators. I just want to also highlight that a city may choose a different metric for quantification of these indicators. Different cities may have different data collection methodologies, and the metrics that they would use to quantify these indicators may be different. For Denver, we decided to use water consumption as a measure of water use efficiency in gallons per capita per day. So in this case, water use efficiency is the indicator, and water use and then consumption in gallons per capita per day, or GPCD, is the metric that is used to quantify water use intensity. As you can see here, at level 1, these data are collected and presented at the city level. So maybe a 5-year reporting process of 5 years of data for gallons per capita per day. You can see these are the values, around 130 GPCD in Denver, but over the past 10 years, Denver has achieved 2 to 3% reduction of this water use intensity or efficiency metric. So level 1, city scale, very broad presentation of this water use efficiency or water use intensity metric. In level 2 then, now we are talking about, in addition to broadly and readily available data, to dig a little bit more into classes and categories of information. For level 2 then, we are talking about water use efficiency by land use type and use category. So for example, in this case, you're seeing residential, commercial, institutional, and industrial irrigation and wholesale water categories. So you can see in Denver, residential water use is the major category of water use, followed by commercial, institutional, and industrial water use. So now, again, in this case, level 2 indicator is the same as level 1 indicator, but assessed and characterized at more details regarding sectors of economy or sectors of the city, as well as type of water use that we are seeing here. And then in level 3, to demonstrate how this process would work for City of Denver, we are then characterizing this water use efficiency and intensity by going from city level or community level to census tract level. Now, census tract may be changed to neighborhood or some other type of polygons or geographies, depending on what makes sense for that city. But census tracts often are the geographies that are used for more detailed analysis. So in this case, again, you can see from level 1 to level 3, now we are understanding where we have more or more intense water use within the city. And therefore, actions can be implemented and adaptively managed by improved understanding of water use by classes and categories and across city regions and communities, as demonstrated here. Similarly, I computed this for EPA Water Affordability Index. So the EPA Affordability Index is the ratio of all water and wastewater related expenditures by, or normalized or divided by the income, median income. So if you calculate this by census tract, and by the way, what I'm showing here is solely for potable water. I did not add in this slide stormwater and wastewater. So you can, and the ratio that people are talking about often is 3 to 4. So, you know, when we get to 3% or 4%, then we're talking about at-risk communities for water expenditure and water bill. So you can see that if you look at City of Denver as a whole, that level 1 indicator, City of Denver won't have any problem. Median income is pretty high, and therefore when you compute this water affordability index, we won't see any problem. But by doing the analysis at more geographic details and with finer geographic resolution, then you will see that there are areas that now we're talking about perhaps issues that may be addressed for affordability purposes. By the way, that red polygon that you see at the northeast corner of the map here is the airport region. And obviously that region has specific problems. So that's not a concern in City of Denver. It's just a different land use type. So hopefully this demonstration kind of clarifies this, the difference between assessment efforts and details that are needed across the 3 levels. And as Kristi mentioned, in level 1, we're thinking about just rely on readily available data. What is there? so people can get on board and develop their vision and the foundation of the One Water program. Level 2, now we want to develop a plan, so some more detailed information are useful. And then level 3 indicators focus on implementation and adaptive management. Also, I want to highlight that UWIN has been a blessing in my career and many of our partners. And you have heard from our UWIN webinars that a lot of our researchers and our partners have developed capacities for characterization of these indicators. In my group at One Water Solutions Institute with our partners that I mentioned, including the Water Research Foundation and also groups from EPA and others, we have developed a set of tools that can inform these indicators or can be used to characterize the indicators that will be embedded in our One Water Cities frame rating system. These include the classic tool for life cycle cost of green and gray infrastructure system, our integrated air and water model, which is used for characterization of fit for purpose use of alternative water systems and water sources, Polaris, which is used for integrated land use and water planning, and finally our rapid assessment program for watershed characterization, which includes indicators such as EPA's Healthy Watershed Index and Vulnerability Index that are readily available to generate those level 1 reports that cities can quickly use for getting on board and hopefully make progress along this paradigm. So with that, I'm going to stop here. Again, I want to acknowledge the major fundings for UWIN from NSF, but also acknowledge the Water Research Foundation, EPA, and other partners, including local agencies, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and Colorado Water Conservation Board, and many, many cities that have helped us during this process. We're very grateful for the time and effort from folks in the city of Philadelphia, Denver, Fort Collins, and many other cities that very generously participated in our meetings, informed us during our interview sessions, and helped us really to formulate a process that hopefully will result in a practical tool for implementation and development and implementation of One Water programs in our cities. So with that, I'm going to stop here and hopefully we'll have time for some questions.
Great. Thanks, Mazdak and Kristi. Always wonderful to hear about new and exciting adventures in the world of One Water. Any questions or comments? I see we have Stephanie on from Philadelphia Water Department. Thanks for joining us. Paula Conley is also on from the Green Infrastructure Exchange. Harry Zhang was on. He may have popped off. He's our program manager for the WRF part of that project. Any feedback, questions, comments? Susan, go ahead. See if we can get you unmuted here.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I'm navigating multiple screens here. So I wanted to ask a question about the value of a new rating system in the context of other existing rating systems. So the sort of devil's advocate question is, you know, why do we need another rating system when, for Kristi, when we had the STAR rating system? And I guess while answering that question, a goal would be for the rating systems to play well with each other and not be a burden. So could you kind of speak to like the value of multiple rating systems and how they become, you know, value add and synergistic?
Right. So, you know, I mean, rating systems are designed with different audiences in mind and often with different impetus, you know, and drivers. And so in this case, with this One Water, like cities framework, it is focused on the city, but the participants in it will have more of the knowledge base of those that are participating in the water and wastewater industry. With STAR communities, it was much more of a broader framework. It was an umbrella that crossed multiple areas, including safety, security, equity, etc. And kind of had additional, like you've seen my hands wave on the screen.
Yeah, sorry, like my camera is pointing back at you, so that's weird. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was just like, what is that? Yeah, so I think that this will establish a framework for policies, for planning, for programs within the context of the water world. But for Envision, for instance, Envision is a project-centric tool. And so you wouldn't be able to apply Envision in this one water context. We do have water and wastewater projects that have gone through Envision, including some from Denver Water, but it's always project focused. There's a specific project boundary versus process emphasis, which is what this One Water Cities framework is providing, is more of that process driver.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Susan, great question. This is an excellent question. Obviously, adding more tools to the, you always have to be very careful about the use and value of a tool. And I think what Kristi said is right on. Focus on enabling a process rather than evaluating specific projects. So this is very much goal-oriented with the strategies and that focus on collaboration and self-assessment within cities rather than looking at the project and evaluating broader sustainability categories. Again, this is another aspect. Water is the focus of this tool and integration of water systems with considerations regarding the triple bottom line considerations in water systems, but still it's water and wastewater oriented.
And if I might chime in too a little bit, as part of this project, we didn't go into the details on this, but there was a comprehensive literature review where we reviewed an extensive amount of existing frameworks and systems out there and tried to identify, compare and contrast, and identify maybe some of the areas that are lacking. And that helped inform the developments of this. So we definitely looked at all the tools that are out there, or as many as possible. Dixie, go ahead.
Hi. So I really liked the emphasis on talking about what do the users want and making sure it's usable. And I'm sure this probably varies city to city, but what would be like a general time frame, like what is feasible in that collaboration process for getting that initial framework out and making sure that it is usable that first time around? What does that look like?
Well, as a planner, so my background is planning, and so as a planner, I have a notion of what I would do to enact, this framework and kind of get it up and running and moving. But I can't say that all cities would operate the same way based on their own kind of political establishment and kind of like their own practice. But as far as getting things up and running, one of the key things we talked about was having not only top-down leadership buy-in, but also bottom-up understanding and motivation from staff to participate. So early steps would really be like if it was a brand new city that are just like, oh, what is One Water? What am I going to do? Then the first step is really that educational piece and getting that as a foundation. Which I think that this rating system and the subsequent guidebook will provide that underlying understanding of what's required to create not only the collaborative space, but the reason why you would want to do that. And that is often the motivating factor. It's there are benefits, obviously, in terms of efficiency and environmental and social benefits, but the cost efficiency would probably be something that a city that's just coming into this would take a look at and say, oh, I think it makes much more sense for us to collaborate so that we're not repeating the same thing that each other is doing, but we can kind of get in line and get in the groove with one another. One of the things I've experienced in implementing a lot of frameworks is that people need to have the buy-in where they feel engaged in the framework and they feel like it's a dynamic thing and not just a structural thing. And so as much as possible, this framework, by breaking it down into those various categories, it provides like the motivating actions that bring people into the dynamic, if that makes sense.
And I will add to that, according to those categories of information, we will be developing a how to use this rating system chapter in our guidebook. So essentially it says, if you are an onboarding city, these are things that you need to consider. You follow a process to use this rating system with adequate and ample information to do. And then we are also very interested, should resources enable us, to develop a web tool that essentially encapsulates these categories and those how-to steps that enable cities to actually use it and even organize their efforts in that concept, and then build a consistency for that. But this is, again, great question. Going from a rating system or the concept, the framework, to actual application and implementation of the tool requires those how-to steps that we will be developing over the next course of next couple of months, and then piloting studies. We are going to pilot the tool in cities that may be characterized as onboarding, progressing, and advancing. So cities across the paradigm will have information about how to use the tool. Bill, I can see your hand has been risen. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Nice presentation. What I'm trying to sort out in my mind is that at one point in time, when I say you, I mean UWIN, had developed a tool for evaluation where it was a circular thing, you know, I mean, and is this kind of an evolution from that?
Yes, so we again, we're building on, so the process is this: we conceptualize the process within our Urban Water Innovation Network, Bill, and develop a lot of a research agenda according to that interconnected, highly nonlinear sets of interactions between disciplines and things of that. So that's for a research, or from a research point of view, those are really critical. Those are really essential to identify how our projects are collectively making progress. In terms of building a rating system, you know, that's why we engaged with people like Kristi and also folks at Corolla Engineers. You have to be pragmatic, ease of use, a process where people can start, go through steps, and at some milestones, produce some deliverables that then can help them identify where they are and how they are making progress. So in that sense, this is that evolution of going from that research agenda to a rating system that brings things together, but has a practical use in mind for the application of the tool.
Yeah, good answer. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Sure, my pleasure.
Stephanie, I feel like you want to chime in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say overall, I really love the scope of the framework. It's, you know, at like the city level. I think that's really interesting because often, depending on, you know, what you're trying to do with wastewater, water, stormwater, whatever it may be, you know, ends up being like different agencies, one agency, and then also responsibilities thereof can also be spread across different city agencies that don't correspond with those functions either. So to me, that's really helpful to frame it all together. And I think just having a rating system can help people understand that that all is important. So it's a very difficult thing for people to buy into because everyone has limited funding, of course. So I appreciate that. And it's really great to hear about just comparing different rating systems and kind of how this fits in and how it could be used more specifically. And hopefully, you know, this can create a more detailed roadmap. I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of One Water you know, concepts out there and examples, but I think this gives it a lot more specificity and then also brings it up to that city level, which I really appreciate. I've been trying to understand a little bit more about how LA is doing some of that. So I definitely like that you went that approach.
Stephanie, this, first of all, hi, good to see you. As always, great to see you. I just want to also acknowledge these folks at Philadelphia have been nothing short of phenomenal. amount of things that we've learned from City of Philadelphia, I can't put a measure. I can't quantify the things that we've learned as a research group collectively with you. And Stephanie, a couple of things to keep in mind. In our rating system, in the report that we will generate for WRF and submit to WRF, in addition to this framework, we will have the how-to section, and the how-to section will have experiences, case studies from cities like Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Denver, New York, so people can actually see how did the city tackle or address the issue that is summarized on that how-to step. So right now where we are is we have the underlying framework, and we are working on that how-to section. We've done interviews, as you know, you guys were one of our cities that we interviewed for learning about these processes. And what we are going to do is to take those tests or case studies and translate that to information for how-to section. So in the report, there will be a section for the framework, a section for test cases or case studies, and then a how-to section with information about pragmatic considerations that cities that have embarked on these transitions have experienced and how they address those issues. And then we will finish with a chapter on a menu of indicators. Not all of them will be important for every city, but at least you will get a set of indicators that we've learned from literature, from our interviews, and other experiences from UWIN research, categorized by level 1, level 2, or level 3 for each of those elements as I described. So that's our hope, that by making or organizing everything that we are doing by these 3 levels and those categories, then people can say where to get started and what to produce along each of these steps and each levels.
Right. I think another thing to add to that is like how important in this framework being process oriented is, because you can learn things from LA, but you are never, you are not LA, you know, and just like Omaha, like was, you know, not Portland. So there are things that maybe would work really well in Portland that would never fly in Nebraska. But I can figure out by being process oriented, how do I take things through it within my cultural context, within my environmental context, and still be able to move forward with this idea of creating a collaborative space and maximizing our opportunities that might not be realized in other communities. I think one of the other things that you know, that Mazdak we had talked about was being able to create these indicators, but also having really clear methodologies associated with those indicators, so that you know what the basis is if you're trying to do an apples to apples comparison to another community. What is it that they measured? What is it that were part of their data limitations that maybe they left out of their measurement that would be really important for your community? So you're really, again, the focus is the self-assessment, but then learning from others and collaborating with others to make each other stronger.
Great. Well, we are just about at the top of the hour. So thanks for joining us, everyone. I will be sure to get this posted and the link sent out. I'm working on arranging one final set of UWIN webinars. I don't have the schedule finalized yet, but I will be sure you all know when that is posted, and we're ready to wrap things up. So good to see you all. Have a wonderful afternoon. Those of us on the Front Range, stay warm, stay safe out there today.
Great seeing you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Ellen.